That's one of the things I liked about this company was that you already have a pipeline for this.
Yes, well, when you're talking about the market, and I just use U.S. numbers in there, Europe and the rest of the world's about the same and growing probably faster than the U.S. There are 8,700 breast centers in the United States. We know that because they're regulated by the FDA and they publish every month how many there are. And there are about 12,000 full-field digital machines and another 2,000 stereotactic breast biopsy machines, which is a technology that my former company pioneered back in the early 90s to make needle biopsy an alternative to going to surgery for a diagnostic result. So we know the customers, we know where they are, and as I mentioned, there's about 500 customers that still have our memo test table, although it's been 10 years since the company was sold, 9 years. They're still using the machine, but it's technologically obsolete. So right off the bat, we have 500 loyal customers that we're going to go after. So that's the market in the U.S.
Okay. Okay.
So is this a lease sale or is it a sales sale?
Funding is really not an issue once a decision is made by a clinic or hospital to buy the equipment, because every leasing company in the world wants to lease the equipment. So purchase versus buy, lease rates, click fees, there's all types of mechanisms from the financial world to provide the clinics and hospitals various ways of funding the equipment. So it's not
Not something the company has to do?
no, we don't have to do it. There's very good leasing companies that are begging for our business to refer to them so they can do the intermediary financing.
Okay, so there's no income stream for you either?
Not from financing, but there is from service. GE makes most of their money on financing and service in the medical imaging space. And here, these machines have typically 10% annual service contracts. So I don't know if you noticed, but in a pro forma 5 years out, we have a $20 million service business, and that grows very rapidly. And that's a business that's pretty protected because it's our technology, it's very software intensive, and it's not something independent service can walk away with. So our disposable, high margin disposable, in at Fisher Imaging, my former company, we had 85 to 90% gross margins on service business.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so you can find your customers, you can convince them that this is what they should have to stay ahead of the curve of their competition. And how will we come to that? What about reimbursement? How's that going to work?
Yeah, very interesting. I mentioned tomosynthesis. Maybe some of you heard about that because it's if you Google that, you'll see every breast center in the DC area is going to be advertising tomosynthesis. That does not have reimbursement. It's a new technique. It goes way back to the future where they did linear tomography. The challenge is that it compresses the breast, it doubles the radiation to the woman, and there's no reimbursement, and it doubles the time it takes to read a film. So with 40 million mammograms, we don't have enough radiologists if that technology were really to work. So it's a workflow issue, but a lot of the best breast radiologists are not adopting it for those reasons, that it slows them down because it finds a few more cancers and it cuts a few callbacks. We anticipate that three-dimensional full breast CT will make a dramatic impact on both false positives, callbacks, and on increasing the sensitivity.
So is it going to also decrease the number of suits that doctors might experience by getting more
I think I heard Randy was a lawyer, and because there are more lawyers than there are things to do, I don't think that anything's going to slow down the lawsuits. One thing I'll point out is that MRI is the most sensitive technique for detecting breast cancer, but it uses gadolinium. And gadolinium causes, in some women with poor kidney function, a very debilitating disease called nephrogenic systemic fibrosis. And I believe within 10 years there'll be a class action suit, even though they black box win the contrast agent, because they're screening these high-risk women once a year with gadolinium, which is a toxic metal. It's okay in most cases, but somebody's going to make a mistake. There'll be a woman getting an MRI whose kidney function wasn't proper. There'll be a screw up with a test, and I can see this being a huge lawsuit, just like breast implants were. That wasn't justified, by the way, but I think it will be litigation. Whereas what we're dealing with the breast CT contrast, when we inject contrast, it's used 100 million times a year for routine angiography. So I think this is going to be less litigation for that aspect of imaging.
Okay, I'm sorry to hog the floor here.
Oh, no, hog away. I've got a few questions.
Sure.
I didn't get the question.
Yes, so are you concerned about new modalities for diagnosing breast cancer, such as circulating rare cancer cells that now can be collected from the bloodstream and detected at very early stages for a number of solid tumors?
Yeah, there's many technologies that have been promised to be able to use for screening. Unfortunately, they're not sensitive enough, and although everybody has tried to find a serum marker with protein expression that could indicate cancer, typically they're using that after they've already diagnosed cancer and looking at response to treatment. So mammography is, although it's criticized, and yesterday reading the Wall Street Journal, there was another article criticizing it, it's been subjected to a large number of randomized controlled trials for screening. And I don't see, as long as we can keep lowering the X-ray dose, which I think we can do in 3D, even lower than 2D, I don't see that mammography in the near future has a challenge. What's going to happen is we're going to personalize the approach to women, and that's where DNA expression arrays will help, where we'll look at women genetically and say, you are higher risk for breast cancer. Your screening interval needs to be different or more frequent than what we do with an annual mammogram. So that's going to change, but I don't see on the screening side anything in the near term that threatens to have a better screening test for breast cancer.
Mm-hmm. I'll send you a paper.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm very familiar with the literature, and there's many technologies that do a great job of detecting cancer. But when you look at the costs in the workflow in 40 million women that have randomized controlled trials with technology showing that it's beneficial, it's hard to supplant those things. But typically they're able to add some value in the diagnostic side. And certainly a lot of my surgeon friends are measuring circulating tumor cells to determine that right after post-surgery it's very high, and then within a few days it drops rapidly. They're studying that, but as for a screening text, I don't see that.
So one of the things you mentioned was about false negatives rates. Do you have, you only had 10 minutes, do you have data to show that there's greater sensitivity and specificity?
Here's the issue, that when you screen women with mammography, you find, if you screen 1,000 women, mammography finds about 4 to 5 breast cancers per 1,000 in an asymptomatic population. If you subject that group with dense breast, which is about 40%, to further screening with ultrasound, you find another 3 per 1,000. If you take that same group of women and screen them with MRI, you find 12 cancers per 1,000. So mammography is finding about a quarter of the cancers that the most sensitive technique, MRI, will find. Because we're doing three-dimensional imaging that has the same benefits as MRI, we anticipate we will improve dramatically the false negative rate. But it won't find them all, and it will simply improve it. An interesting point, when I did the analysis, I thought cutting false positives would save the most money, and that's not true. What's going to save the most money is to get the women who are not getting screened, because a screen-detected breast cancer in the literature costs about $25,000 to society. A late-stage breast cancer, even stage 3A or B, or stage 4, is about $125,000, and that's going up because we have better biologics, targeted therapies to deal with those known breast cancers. So, from a standpoint of improving false negatives, I don't have any issues with doctors believing it and understanding it once they see the technology, but we don't have the evidence yet because we're not in the clinic.
And so, do you think that the major factor in women not getting screened is compression rather than access to healthcare?
I think there's a lot of elements, but the surveys in this one paper that the guys in Scripps in San Diego published, and they looked at 7 or 8 screening centers and actually did a survey over 1,500, 2,000 women. And about 25% of those women expressed that mammography was uncomfortable, they didn't like it, and indeed they didn't go back. And there was another paper in the BMJ in England showing the similar thing in terms of the first episodic screen was so uncomfortable the woman said, I'm not going back. And then when you read things like the Wall Street Journal news which says, you know, people are questioning the value of mammography. Unfortunately, women don't read the fine print. They read the headline and they may not get mammography. So we think, and I've had some women doctors tell me this, said, Morgan, you're not going to have to prove that this technology is better. You're just going to have to be able to say there's no compression, and women will come in and flock in for mammography.
A question, what's the skill level of the person who has to operate this? Is it still...
What's interesting, Randy, is that everything radiologists do is cross-sectional, meaning it's 3D.
Okay.
CT, MR, ultrasound, handheld is 3D. They're used to doing that. Breast imaging is the exception, and it's almost an art to be able to discern something in a telescopic view of a 2D breast image to say, gosh, I think I'm seeing something that has a sign of a cancer. I think over time that breast CT will enable more radiologists to become experts in breast, because when you scan through the breast slice by slice, the abnormality, the signs of breast cancer pop right out once you're doing that. So I think actually it's going to expand the easiness and cut down on the shortage of qualified breast radiologists.
Great.
So I didn't hear the ask.
Ask meaning,
What investment you want?
Oh, sorry.
What sort of investment?
yeah, basically we're looking at a $5 million round. We've raised $1 million of it. All of this money has been raised through individuals, mostly radiologists who understand the problem statement. I think we're about a $22 million valuation. This is a round. It's actually designed, I didn't design it that way, but for angel type investing, because we don't have a closed date that's open to the board. We have a valuation. It's a Series B preferred stock. The majority of the owners of the company are, like myself, common shareholders, so there's a liquidation preference, obviously, on the Series B. I have not gone to venture capital. I've had a lot of experience with venture capital. I think the market for medical devices is broken. And I actually think, I did not know the angel groups were so networked. And I've been doing other things for the last 5 years, but in the last 5 years, I think the landscape's changed. And I'd much rather talk to you folks than talk to some arrogant guy out of some business school somewhere who says he's an oncology expert when in fact he may not know much about oncology at all. So I'd much rather talk to you folks, because you may well be familiar with the disease because you've had family members or friends, and it's pretty easy to ask your physicians about this technology. Would it help? And I think I know the answer.
Great. Excellent. Any other questions? Okay. We'll take a wrap on that.